Now.org, the War and Peace Report. Danny Glover is the executive producer of this new documentary, Trouble the Water. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, when Jocelyn Barnes and my co-founder of Louverture Films and certainly the one who brought this film to my attention, when we saw this film initially, we thought about the people who needed to see this story and how the story itself would inspire, empower people. It's the reason why we took on the film. It's the mandate of our company, Louverture Films. And so what has happened over the course is this movie has been screened, and parts of it have been screened at conferences among people who actually are on the ground working around urban areas, disenfranchised areas around the country. It's people who've talked about how can we use this film in our own mobilization, and how can we use this film in the work that we do. So obviously the film has its import in that way. Right now, that people say we can use this film. Not only it moves us emotionally, but it inspires us. And in a sense, coupled with the campaign itself, coupled with this whole idea about change, what does change look like? What does a quality education look like? What does the kind of job creation look like? New Orleans is a city whose basic industry is the service industry. That's why it makes its money. It brings people to the city. People come to the city and experience the wonders of this extraordinary city and everything else. The question is that how do we create jobs, which are the jobs that have a pay, living wages?
I mean, your question, what does change look like, is a key one in this election, because change has become the watchword.
And here we are right now, and we look at what is happening in New Orleans. And make notes, I'm down in New Orleans several times a month. I'm down there because I've adopted a school, the James Singleton Charter School, in a traditionally black neighborhood, 708 students, run by the YMCA. And I'm down there as people, and I watch people under the radar screen mobilize and begin to talk about that and demonstrate their own capacity to change what is happening.
Isn't this an incubator for this new idea about education, that it could be privatized? You're talking about
that's the major problem. One of the problems, this privatization process in New Orleans schools has gone on long before Katrina.
They fired all the teachers.
They fired all the teachers, which is the oldest teachers union in the Deep South. In the Deep South, fired all of the teachers. The charter school mandate, and James Singleton is different. It's a charter school. It's grounded in the community. It takes all comers. It does not selective in this process. It takes all comers. But it's this whole privatization of education and other vital institutions has been going on in New Orleans for a while. It's a test case not only for New Orleans, but perhaps a template for what is going to happen to urban areas around the country. And I think we have to be very concerned about that. And the only way in which people's voices are going to be heard are on the ground, mobilizing, talking about and envisioning their idea of what these institutions look like, their idea of what pay, living wages look like, their ideas of safety in the community and health care and housing in the community. Those are the things that are going to happen.
Do you think Senator Obama is addressing these issues at a national level?
Well, I think.
And do you have his ear?
I think that unions have his ear. And when I talk about the union movement, I speak most notably about Change the Wind has his ear. I think that specifically Bruce Rayner and Unite Here, as well as Andy Stern, who represent workers, service industry workers, has the ear, and could be possibly bridge between those communities we talk about employment, job creation, those communities, those who are unemployed, underemployed, and certainly I think that's a possibility. The reason why we support this candidacy is that. The reason that we have to be the architects of our own rescue. We have to be the architects of this change. And whatever we do is all founded on that.
Danny Glover, before we end this conversation, today is a historic day. 45 years ago, King gives his I Have a Dream speech in Washington. Where were you then?
I was in high school at that time. I was in front of the television watching that speech. As I've said before, I'm a child of the civil rights movement, and I've watched the movement from basically as a child. From
5 years later, you'd lead the strike at San Francisco State.
5 years later, I was at San Francisco State College as a student who led a strike that lasts 4.5 months.
Longest in history.
The longest on the U.S. campus in history, and the result was an ethnic studies program, the first ethnic studies program at any major college in the United States.
You shut down the university.
We shut down the university, and our cry was on strike, shut it down. But we also shut down with support of the students in Czech Republic. We also supported the students, the Parisian students, and we also were in support of an end to the war in Vietnam as well.
What do you think about activism today? I mean, last night, as Barack Obama was nominated, the first African-American to head a major party presidential ticket, there were thousands of people outside the Pepsi Center, and it's awkward even to keep referring to the Pepsi Center, but maybe it is symbolic in some way all over this country. These centers named for the corporations. Thousands of people led by veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan marching in uniform, in unison, trying to get the Obama campaign's attention with 3 demands. Pull out now from Iraq, reparations to the Iraqi people, health care for vets. They almost were tear gassed. The riot police were poised. There were hundreds of them. But finally, the Obama campaign came out, and their military liaison, vet liaison, spoke with them.
Yes.
What about activism today and where we stand today in the midst of war?
Well, as we watch the activism that's been built around the globalization movement, as we watch the activism that is built around protecting the environment, and certainly the activism built around real social, meaningful social and economic change, that activism that has to be grounded in understanding what is really happening to us. I'm interested enough in reading an op-ed, I believe February 3rd, by Robert Wright. He talked about how the mean wage of the average worker, American worker, has remained stagnant for the last 35 years. This is not a process that happened just with the Bush administration, but it's happened with subsequent administration or prior administrations as well. We have to find ways in which we begin to engage people in an imaginative way in creating the new language that we need to talk about in terms of racism, the question of racism, the terms of the language we need in terms of class, the language we need in terms of understanding our relationship in terms of foreign policy and domestic policy. It's going to be us. Whether we can challenge the administration, as George Will said on Stephanopoulos' show, that there's only going to be 2 elite. We're going to choose between what elite is going to rule this country and is going to be in charge of this country. We have to debunk that. We have to be that wedge that drives the question and ask the hard questions. That's the kind of activism that we need. It's not simply going out and voting on Election Day on November 4th. It's remaining active. It's getting involved in every single thing to talk about progressive issues, from health care to education to job creation, everything else, to foreign policy. That's what that activism has to resonate, and that activism has to resonate in that way. And we're going to push this candidacy, and the further we're going to push, just as the civil rights movement, just as that moment when the civil rights movement pushed the idea of Johnson's Great Society, pushed the idea of the war on poverty, and pushed those ideas, which I think are essential to making this country realize it's what it can be. And it's always been that way. This country has always been run by elite, and it's an elitist democracy. And that's not a radical concept. It's an elitist democracy. When people talk about democracy, they don't really talk about participatory democracy until the point that we get a such election day.
We're going to leave it there. And Danny Glover, I want to thank you for being with us. Danny Glover here in Denver, actor, activist, executive producer of the new documentary Trouble the Water, about New Orleans, also making a film about Haiti. And another time we'll talk more about what he's doing there. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, a Democracy Now! Exclusive, powerful House Congress member, Henry Waxman, is calling on Senator Obama, if he becomes president, to shut down, and even before, to support stopping military contracts to Blackwater. Stay with us.
There's an old green shed at the end of an overgrown driveway. And years ago, that shed collapsed and fell. Years before that, there's a withered dog chained up there. I saved him, maybe he saved me as well. Now he's gone, and I think I've come undone. It's midnight in the city of destruction. La 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 la.